Imagine it's 18th of April, 2025. You are a 24-year-old student living in Vancouver, Canada. You have already delayed your studies by 2 years because rent and tuition would not fit inside the same month. Now you share an apartment with your older brother because he works full-time and pays most of the rent. Around you, students pay $1,100 to $500 for a single room near campus, often in homes packed with 5 or 6 people. You walk past tidy streets lined with detached houses and know many of them are worth more than $2 million. When your friends talk about the future, nobody talks about buying a place. They talk about surviving one more lease. If you have ever wondered why buying a house now feels impossible for so many people who did everything they were told to do, stay with me. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has happened before, in different countries, under different flags, with different currencies. And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. Because the strange thing about Emily Chu's world is that it is not just a Vancouver story. It rhymes with London, it rhymes with Dublin, it rhymes with Tokyo in the late 1980s, and the United States in the early 1980s, and again, in a very different way after the crash of 2008. The details change, the wallpaper changes, but the beams inside the house are the same. A home stops being just a place to live and starts acting like a vault, a tax shelter, a retirement plan, a status symbol, and a chip in a giant casino made of debt. Once that happens, ordinary wages start chasing something much bigger than shelter. They start chasing an asset. And assets do not play fair with paychecks. That is what this video is really about. Not whether young people are lazy, not whether one generation is morally better than another, not whether the dream is dead forever. This is about how houses become hard to buy when 3 forces move at the same time. The price of the home rises, the price of the loan rises, and the number of homes does not keep up. It is like trying to cross a river while the bridge is lifting, the water is rising, and the ticket price is changing every 5 minutes. On paper, you are still allowed to cross. In real life, you are stuck on the wrong side. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. A housing crisis is almost never caused by one thing. People like single villains because they make the story feel neat, but housing rarely collapses in a neat way. It behaves more like a machine with 3 gears. The first gear is supply, which simply means how many homes exist where people actually need them. The second gear is credit, which means how easily banks will lend and at what rate. The third gear is income, which means what ordinary people can really pay each month without choking the rest of their lives. If homes are expensive but loans are cheap, some buyers can still squeeze through. If loans are costly but prices are low, some buyers can still manage. If supply is tight but wages are rising fast, the pain can be softened for a while. But when supply is thin, prices are high, and borrowing costs jump, the whole system turns into a locked gate. People keep staring at the sticker price, but the real story is the monthly payment. A house is never just a number on a listing. It is the down payment, the mortgage rate, the taxes, the insurance, the repairs, and the years of your life you trade to hold it together. This is why the problem feels so personal. You are not just being told that a product is expensive. You are being told that the normal path to adulthood now requires a password you were never given. In the United States, Freddie Mac estimated in late 2024 that the country was still short about 3.7 million housing units. The same research suggested that if housing costs were lower, America would have formed about 1 million more households, mostly younger ones. Think about what that means. The shortage is not just missing buildings, it is missing lives, missing couples moving out, missing children, missing plans. A housing shortage is like a city keeping its lights on while quietly locking thousands of doors. This brings us directly to the first part of the pattern. Sometimes buying a home feels impossible not because houses suddenly become mansions, but because money itself becomes expensive. America learned this the hard way in the early 1980s. Inflation had burned through the 1970s like a slow electrical fire hidden in the walls. By October 1981, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate had climbed to 18.4%. That number is so extreme it almost sounds fake now. But it was real, and it changed the meaning of affordability overnight. Imagine a young American couple in 1981 finding a home they could have afforded only a few years earlier. The price tag might not have looked insane by today's standards. The trap was in the rate. With mortgage rates near 18%, the monthly payment became a concrete block tied to the ankle of the buyer. You were not buying a house anymore. You were renting your own debt from the bank at a punishing price. A family could save, behave responsibly, and still watch the front door swing shut because the price of money had turned hostile. The market seized up. Existing home sales in the United States fell more than 22% in 1980 and then another 18.6% in 1981. Builders slowed, buyers froze, Sellers waited. The dream did not disappear, but it became narrow and cruel. It was still visible through the window, just no longer reachable by the people standing outside. Even so, there's a detail many people miss. The median first-time homebuyer in America in 1981 was 29. In 2024, that median age had risen to 38. By 2025, it hit 40. That tells you something important. Even when rates were far worse in 1981, the ladder itself was lower. Homes were still closer to wages than they are for many buyers today. That is the first lesson history gives us. High rates can make housing feel impossible even when prices are not absurd. But high rates alone do not explain why the feeling now is so broad, so generational, and so sticky. In 1981, the problem was like a blizzard, brutal, obvious, and eventually temporary. Today, in many countries, the problem feels more like a glacier. It moved slowly for years, crushing the path so gradually that people kept calling it normal. Look at how the same logic works today. In October 2023, the average American 30-year mortgage rate pushed above 8%, the highest since 2000. Freddie Mac research later showed that in September 2024, the monthly mortgage payment on a typical single-family home was still 29% higher than the rent on that same house. Not $29, 29%. That gap helps explain why many young adults feel like they are racing on a treadmill while the finish line moves backward. And there is another layer. America did not just run into expensive credit, it ran into too few homes, especially smaller ones. The share of newly completed single-family homes under 1,400 square feet fell from 15% of new single-family homes in 1999 to 10% in 2024. For homes built specifically for sale, the drop was even harsher, from 14% to 4%. The starter home did not only get pricier, in many places it stopped being built at all. The first rung of the ladder was not just higher, it was missing. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If homes become unaffordable because both the house and the loan are expensive, what matters more, the price of the house or the price of the money? Drop your answer in the comments, seriously. Because what I'm about to show you next is the part of this story that most people never hear, and it changes everything. Now here is where it gets interesting. Sometimes homes do not become impossible because interest rates rise. Sometimes they become impossible because society starts treating land like a magic mirror that can only reflect wealth upward. Japan in the late 1980s is one of the clearest examples in modern history. By then, Tokyo was no ordinary city in the global imagination. It was the center of a national fever. Stocks soared, land values exploded. People began to believe that property was not just safe, but sacred. Reuters described the mood with almost surreal details. In 1987 alone, land values in Tokyo rose 58%. In Ginza, 1 square meter of prime land changed hands for about 32 million yen, around $230,000 at the time. The grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo were said to be worth more than all the real estate in California. That comparison was absurd. It was also revealing. When a society starts comparing one patch of land to an entire American state with a straight face, the problem is no longer housing, it is national hallucination. Ordinary people felt it too. An 87-year-old former Nomura employee later remembered groups of young office workers crowding around stock boards, squealing over prices. People talked casually about golf club memberships that cost 500 million yen, roughly $3.5 million in 1989 money. It was not only greed, it was social gravity. Everyone around you seemed to be getting rich from assets. Standing still began to feel like moving backward. When a bubble reaches that stage, it stops asking whether you believe in it. It punishes you if you do not. And behind the euphoria was debt. Property loans from Japanese non-bank lenders grew from 22 trillion yen in 1985 to 80 trillion yen by the end of 1989. That is how these moments work. Rising prices justify bigger loans, and bigger loans push prices higher. It is a spiral that looks like prosperity from a distance and like quicksand from up close. Housing becomes detached from shelter and attached to leverage, which means borrowed money piling on borrowed money. The roof is still there. But underneath it, the floor is made of promises. Then the music stopped. When the Japanese bubble burst, the bad loans did not vanish. They remained like concrete poured into the banking system. Growth slowed. Asset prices fell. Households that thought they were becoming permanently richer found themselves trapped in a long hangover. Research on Tokyo area households found that the boom and bust caused average lifetime losses, with 61.4% of households in the study experiencing a decline in lifetime well-being, while only 38.6% gained. That is another detail most people miss. Even during a boom, most people do not come out ahead. The cheering crowd hides the arithmetic. And this is why Japan matters for a video about buying a house now. A housing market can become unaffordable long before it crashes. In fact, that is often the sign that something deeper has gone wrong. The winners on paper get louder. The losers become invisible because they never enter the market at all. They do not show up as foreclosures or bankruptcies. They show up as delayed marriages, smaller families, longer commutes, shared bedrooms, and the quiet sentence Emily Chu used in Vancouver, "That is not even possible." This leads to the second part of the story. People often assume that when a housing bubble bursts, the system resets and becomes fair again. History shows something colder. A crash can actually make future affordability worse if it destroys construction, scares lenders, and leaves a deep supply hole behind. Ireland is a powerful example. During the Celtic Tiger years, credit expanded fast and home building exploded. Between 2005 and 2007, Ireland was building about 85,000 housing units a year. Money was loose. Optimism was thick. The country looked like a crane-filled promise. Then came the crash. From 2007 to 2012, Irish house prices fell 54% in nominal terms. Wealth was wiped out. Banks were hit. Builders disappeared. But the key part came after the headlines faded. Supply collapsed even harder than prices. By 2013, new housing output had fallen to just over 4,500 units. It did not rise back above 20,000 until 2022. A nation that had once overbuilt suddenly stopped building almost altogether. And that meant the future shortage was already being planted inside the wreckage. Since 2012, nominal house prices in Ireland have risen 126%, and rents have risen 108%. The average loan-to-income multiple, which is a fancy way of saying how many years of disposable income the average loan represented, climbed to 4.7 by late 2006 and was back to 4.6 by the end of 2023. In other words, the crash did not kill the mechanism. It interrupted it, then rebuilt it on thinner supply. The same river found a new course. The human cost is easy to miss if you only watch national charts. A European Commission brief found that in 2016, more than 75% of Irish households in the bottom income quartile spent over one-third of their income on housing. Mortgage payments consumed 55% of net income for some of those households, while rent absorbed 40%. By May 1st, 2022, there were only 851 homes available to rent nationwide in Ireland, an all-time low. Imagine a whole country breathing through a straw. That is what a supply crisis feels like. And this is where history gets uncomfortable. The 2008 crash is often remembered as a morality play about reckless borrowing. That happened. But there was a second story after the crash, and it matters just as much. Fear kept construction weak. Regulations tightened. Finance changed. Many builders never returned. Population pressure kept building, especially in urban areas. By the time demand recovered, the shelves were bare. Young buyers did not inherit a cleaned-up market. They inherited a scarred one. Most people will never know what you now know. Most people will keep trusting systems they do not understand. If you are still here, you are not most people. Hit subscribe, because the next section is the part this channel was made for. The part they never put in textbooks. Now look at all three together. The same mechanism, different countries, different decades, same result. In America in 1981, the price of money exploded. In Japan in the late 1980s, land became a national obsession powered by debt. In Ireland after 2008, the crash destroyed supply so badly that the next generation walked into a shortage before it even knew one existed. 3 different roads, 1 destination. The monthly cost of entry moved beyond what ordinary households could bear. This is the pattern most people feel but cannot name. Housing becomes impossible when shelter is forced to do too many jobs at once. It has to be a home, an investment, a retirement account, collateral for lenders, revenue for governments, and political protection for existing owners. The moment a house carries all those roles, its price stops reflecting only what it costs to live there. It starts reflecting what it is worth to everyone trying to use it for something else. That is why wages alone cannot catch up. A paycheck is fighting an ecosystem. Then the shortage tightens the screw. The local rules block density. Small homes vanish. Builders face higher material costs, labor shortages, land scarcity, and expensive financing. In the United States, regulations were estimated to account for 23.8% of the average sales price of a new single-family home in 2021, or about $93,170. For apartments, some estimates put the regulatory share of development cost around 41%. In Canada, zoning kept huge pieces of urban land reserved for single-family homes. In Ireland, post-crash underbuilding hollowed out the future. Different policy choices, same missing homes. At this point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. When rates are low and credit is easy, prices rise fast because buyers can borrow more. When rates rise sharply, affordability still gets worse because monthly payments jump. Existing owners stay put because they do not want to give up cheap mortgages. Supply tightens again, so the market punishes you in both directions. When money is cheap, prices run away. When money is expensive, payments do. It is like a gate that swings inward and outward at the same time. Either way, it hits the newcomer in the face. That is why buying a house now feels impossible for an entire generation. Not because one bad year happened, not because one politician failed, but because the system learned how to preserve asset values more effectively than it preserved access. Older owners gained wealth. New entrants inherited the bill. The ladder was not burned. It was simply pulled up, rung by rung, while the people already standing on it were told this was just the market working normally. So who gets hurt the most when this pattern hardens? History gives a painfully consistent answer. The people with the least existing housing wealth and the least family backup get squeezed first. Not the richest. Not usually the oldest. The squeeze lands on young earners, renters, single buyers, migrants to expensive cities, and families trying to save while paying market rent. They are the ones asked to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Look at Britain. In 1991, around 67% of people aged 25 to 34 owned their home. By 2020, that figure was about 40%. Reuters captured the pattern through Claire Tomlinson, a 28-year-old e-commerce worker in Sandbach, England. She and her partner were doing what every personal finance lecture tells people to do. They were renting modestly, saving diligently, trying to buy a 3-bedroom home. Then the pandemic-era boom, helped by a property tax holiday and a rush for bigger homes outside cities, pushed prices out of reach. Her response was simple and devastating. You try to do the responsible thing, and then you realize the system is broken. That sentence matters because it breaks one of the oldest myths about housing. The myth says the market rewards discipline. History shows that discipline matters, but timing, location, and inherited advantage matter too. In Britain, research in 2020 found that 33% of people likely to buy a house in the next 5 years expected parental financial help, up from 19% the year before. The phrase bank of mom and dad sounds cute until you realize what it means. Homeownership stops being mainly about earnings and starts being partly about ancestry. Canada shows the same social split in even brighter colors. In Vancouver, Willow Yamuchi and her husband bought a family home 25 years ago for $275,000. That same property is now worth several million. The average detached home in Vancouver was around $350,000 in 2000. Now it is more than $2 million. In 2021, the average after-tax household income in Canada was about $88,000, while the average home price reached $713,500. By the second quarter of 2024, RBC estimated that carrying a mortgage on the average benchmark Canadian home priced at $810,200 required an income of about $155,000. Ownership costs took 59.5% of median household income. Think about what that does to ordinary life. It changes who can stay in the city where they grew up. It changes who can have children or when. It changes who takes creative risks, who starts businesses, who lives near family, who leaves, who waits, who gives up. A housing market is not just a market, it is a sorting machine. When it jams, it does not merely create stress, it reshapes the map of belonging. Meanwhile, those who already own often walk away fine, or more than fine. In America, repeat buyers in 2024 were typically 61 years old, while first-time buyers were 38. A record 26% of home buyers paid cash. In 2025, NAR reported that the median down payment for repeat buyers was 23%, while 30% of repeat buyers were all cash. That is the quiet divide inside the same market. One side shops with equity and savings accumulated over decades. The other side arrives with rising rent, rising rates, and a down payment target that keeps moving like a mirage. You can see the same fracture line in the United Kingdom. Official data for 2024 showed the median home in England cost 7.7 times the annual earnings of a full-time worker. In Wales, it was 5.9 times. Looking at disposable household income, the ratios were 7.9 for England, 5.4 for Wales, 5.3 for Scotland, and 4.6 for Northern Ireland. These are not abstract numbers, they are time turned into stone. A ratio like that means years of work have to pile up before a bank will even take you seriously. In London, the problem becomes almost theatrical. The city can look prosperous from the sidewalk and unreachable from the payslip at the exact same time. And then rates piled on top of prices. The Building Societies Association found that the average mortgage rate for UK first-time buyers rose from 2.2% in March 2022 to 5.6% in November 2023. The share of gross income going to mortgage repayments rose from 16.8% to 22.5%. The number of mortgaged first-time buyers fell 22.4% in 2023. In London, the average first-time buyer deposit reached 150% of gross annual income by late 2023. Read that again. Not 15%, 150% of annual income. A deposit stopped being a step and started looking like a wall. This is why the phrase affordable housing can feel almost mocking to ordinary people. They are not looking at ratios on a policy paper. They are looking at a decade of their life compressed into a number they may never catch. Housing stress works like rust. It spreads quietly through everything attached to it. Couples delay weddings because they want stability first. Parents postpone children because they need another room first. Workers stay in jobs they dislike because they cannot risk moving. Young adults remain in childhood bedrooms not because they are immature, but because rent eats the future before savings can reach it. The damage is not only financial, it is chronological. It steals time. There is a counterintuitive fact here that history keeps repeating. Rising house prices do not make a society richer in the way people think. They can make existing owners feel richer, yes. They can swell paper wealth. They can lift tax revenues. But for the society as a whole, especially if supply does not expand, rising home values are often just a transfer machine. Wealth moves toward those who already own land and away from those who need access to it. The country looks wealthier on a balance sheet while becoming more brittle in daily life. It is like painting gold on a locked door and calling the building more generous. This helps explain why modern housing debates feel so emotional. People are not only arguing about prices, they are arguing about fairness across time. In the United States, first-time buyers made up just 24% of the market in 2024, down from 32% the year before. Their median household income rose to $97,000, which sounds comfortable until you realize it reflects how expensive entry has become. The market did not get easier for average households. It selected for higher earners and older buyers. Even among first-time buyers, more people leaned on family wealth. A quarter used loans or gifts from friends or family for down payments, and a record share used inheritances. The door did not open wider. It simply opened for a narrower slice of people. In that sense, housing markets can become museums of past advantage. The people who bought 20 or 30 years earlier are not villains for owning homes. Many simply arrived when the bridge was still down. But once values rise and policy begins protecting those values, reform becomes politically painful. Every measure that might lower land costs or increase supply can feel to existing owners like a threat to retirement, inheritance, or status. So the system drifts. It preserves scarcity because scarcity flatters the people already inside it. The house becomes a castle, and the drawbridge becomes public policy. The question is not whether this pattern will repeat. History has already answered that. The only question is whether you will see it before it sees you. If this channel helps you think differently about the world you live in, subscribe. It costs nothing, and it might change everything. So what did the survivors of these periods have in common? Not the people who got lucky once, not the people who won a bubble lottery, the people who made it through long stretches of housing stress with their balance, their options, and sometimes their sanity intact. The historical record shows that those who came through these periods largely shared three characteristics. First, they understood that the real price of a house is not the sticker price. It is the payment, the risk, and the flexibility you give up. In 1981, some American buyers waited because they saw that an 18% mortgage could turn a modest home into a life sentence. In later periods, some buyers chose smaller homes, cheaper regions, or longer periods of renting, not because they loved renting, but because they understood that an asset bought at the wrong monthly burden can own the buyer instead of the other way around. They treated housing like a bridge to walk across, not a trophy to drag behind them. Second, they avoided the trap of assuming recent price growth was permanent truth. In Japan, people acted as if land had discovered gravity in only one direction. In Ireland, the building boom made abundance look endless until it vanished. Survivors tended to distrust euphoria. They noticed when everyone around them started speaking about houses as if they were machines for effortless wealth. In every era, that kind of language is a warning light on the dashboard. Third, and this is the uncomfortable one, many who survived had buffers that others did not. Family help, existing property, cash, geographic flexibility, a willingness to move away from prestige markets. In Britain, more young buyers leaned on parental money. In Canada, people without what locals called the bank of mom and dad were often locked out. In the United States in 2024, a quarter of first-time buyers used loans or gifts from family or friends for the down payment, and a record share used inheritances. That is not a moral lesson, it is a historical observation. In hard housing markets, resilience is often unevenly distributed before the game even begins. None of this means history offers a neat moral. It does not. Housing is where economics becomes intimate. It enters the kitchen. It decides who gets a spare room, who takes the long train, who lives with parents at 30, who shares with siblings, who gets to stay near the people they love. A broken housing market is not a single explosion. It is a pressure system. It leans on millions of tiny decisions, until an entire generation feels its shape in their chest. And that brings us back to Vancouver. Back to the student who had to pause her education so rent and tuition would stop fighting each other. Back to the city where an older generation could buy homes that later became worth millions, while a younger one looks at those same streets and sees a museum behind glass. Emily Chu did not fail some ancient test of thrift. Claire Tomlinson did not forget how to save. Young adults in Tokyo did not invent speculative mania. Irish renters did not cause the post-crash building freeze. These people walked into structures built before they got there. The deepest lesson here is also the simplest. Housing becomes impossible for a generation when homes rise faster than wages, when supply fails to keep up, and when the financial system rewards ownership more than access. That pattern has appeared in different forms again and again. Sometimes it wears the face of high rates. Sometimes it wears the face of a bubble. Sometimes it wears the quiet face of underbuilding and zoning and frozen inventory. But the feeling it creates is always familiar. You work, you save, you wait, and the door keeps moving. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice. Every individual situation is different. Please consult a qualified professional before making any financial decision. This video is not for everyone. Most people will dismiss it. But if one person in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. Not because it will change the world, because it might change their world. Subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.